Well, great, Kathy, thank you. Again, my name's Patrick McKenna. Thanks for being here today. This is an important discussion when we talk about, and even the information that came earlier, the work that's being done in this region is really second to none. I've been outside of the region for many years, managing transportation networks, and being back here after a hiatus, I can really see the impact of the work that's being done here. The service level's incredible, and to Randy and the WMATA team, I just want to say thank you. We talked about the system, the capital needs and everything, but one of the aspects that Randy does really well at WMATA is he develops future leaders. And he's partnered with Eno to do that in many instances, and that's one of those hidden opportunities that sometimes leaders miss, but Randy doesn't. He never misses an opportunity to develop his team, and that's developing that future. It's creating a sustainable leadership path for all the work that needs to be done with the investments that hopefully are being made in the region. As was said, I'm president and CEO of the Eno Center for Transportation. Eno is actually not an acronym. Most people might think it's an acronym. It's actually our founder, William Eno. Was one that back in the 1920s and 30s really got involved with traffic regulation and is credited for innovations such as the stop sign, many of the things that keep us safe out there on the roads today. We today bring together leaders across public, private, and academic and nonprofit sectors to help translate innovation into sound governance and long-term sustainable mobility systems. So we're talking about technologies, automated vehicles, real-time mobility data, and new approaches to network design that are advancing faster than our institutions traditionally plan. But technology alone doesn't determine the future of mobility. Governance, funding, and public trust do. At Eno, we study how decisions are made, how funding flows, and how systems can adapt safely and fairly. That's why this conversation is so timely. I want to thank the Greater Washington Partnership and the Board of Trade. Kathy and Jack, have shared a commitment to thriving, connected, and competitive region, and excited to get going. And I just wanted to jump in with Laura. Mobility trends have continued to evolve after the pandemic. Based on current data, how are people actually moving across the region today?
Yeah, so we are, I guess, in phase 3 of pandemic recovery, sort of from a transportation perspective. What we see in this region and in many regions, metropolitan regions of the country, is that there is as much VMT going on, vehicle miles traveled, or depending on the type of vehicle, but the times of day are shifting and leveling out a bit more. That has a positive impact. Despite all the traffic up here, we have plenty of transportation infrastructure. It's just that everybody wants to be on the same infrastructure at the same moment of time, right? That's the challenge. So spreading it out over time of day is sort of a fundamental thing that, as planners, we have always wanted to do, and it sort of happened a little bit organically because of the pandemic. So that's the general shift we see. But of course, that means that a lot of the assumptions of behavior that we used to plan under, that the big motion is always at 8 a.m. and 5 p.m., those assumptions need to be revisited, and that has a lot of implications on what plans might be the right one for any mode of travel moving forward.
And where do you see the gaps between those behaviors and the existing infrastructure and service, and how do you see those developing?
I think looking at transportation and transportation options to serve non-typical commutes. So I'll give you an example. We were working with Samtrans, which is the transit agency in San Mateo County, which is a similar region. It's San Francisco, and then you have a lot of other communities that commute to it. Samtrans runs a lot of commuter buses from the peninsula to San Francisco. As the pandemic recovery returned, some of their express bus lines had huge decreases in ridership, which was a big problem. And at first they thought, maybe everything changed and we have to build new routes. Maybe we need to sort of reconfigure everything. So what we did is we studied the cars as competition to the buses. We analyzed and detailed the car movements and found that in fact the routes were right, but the times of day had shifted. So all Samtrans did was shift timing on a few routes and saw a uptick in ridership by 30% within a month. That's the type of gaps. I think that some of the gaps are quite small. We just have to learn to revisit some of our assumptions, and we have the tools to do that today.
Do those assumptions and data, are they revealing critical safety gaps as well?
Yes and no. I mean, I think everyone here is probably aware of the increase in deaths and serious accidents that is facing the entire country over the past 10 years. So this year has been a little better, and I know we'll talk about some autonomous solutions to that as well. But I think a lot of what we see in the data is that there are human errors. And what that means is that we as policymakers or we as infrastructure people, the solutions aren't necessarily fully in our hands. Or rather, the traditional infrastructure solutions aren't going to get us as far as we want. Doesn't mean we should stop. They'll get us part of the way there. But I think on the safety question, it's a much more complex solution that requires more than just the infrastructure tools that I and the agencies are used to working with. I will say the safest mile is the one you don't drive, the one you take in the transit.
Right. Well, great. Matthew, as autonomous vehicle operations begin to scale in the region, what steps should cities and states take now in infrastructure, regulation, and partnerships to enable safe and efficient deployment?
Yeah. Well, thank you for the question, and thank you to the partnership and the Board of Trade for having Waymo participate in this event. I remember being here last year in the audience, and now I'm on stage, so I presume that means I'm doing something right. For those of you not familiar with Waymo, we are an autonomous vehicle technology company. We operate a fully driverless ride-hailing service in 5 major cities across the U.S. Today, just in the last few weeks, we've announced almost more than a dozen new cities across the country and around the world, including London and Tokyo, where we hope to expand. So, show of hands, is that how many people in the audience have been in a Waymo? Okay, all right, I could deal with that. We need to get those numbers up, but it's a good start. So, Patrick, to answer your question, I think what we definitely need to start seeing is, I think, a more collaborative approach. I think there are a lot of things that cities and states can be doing with companies like Waymo now to sort of figure out what are autonomous vehicles going to look like in their communities. I think a lot of states, more than half the country at this point, has adopted AV regulations or some sort of framework for how AVs will deploy in their communities. And at this point now, we're focusing really on the other half of the country, a lot of those places on the eastern side of the country. And so what I think we're seeing now is a lot of cities are starting to feel like they have to play catch up. Yep. They're looking to other cities for what has gone right, what has gone wrong. I think what we would encourage is an early and collaborative conversation before we even put vehicles on the road. So, I think here in DC and here in the region, we've had the privilege to test and validate and map since 2024. As was mentioned during the intro, we have plans to hopefully deploy our service in 2026. And so I think that the more early we can start those conversations, the smoother the deployments will be, and the more that we can also figure out what are the unique needs of certain cities. Not every city is created equally, and so we as a company want to make sure that we are addressing some of those unique conditions that exist in places like here in DC before we deploy our service.
What do you think the lessons from early adopters that can be applied to this region are, particularly with safety as well?
I mean, I think, listen, if you look at places like Chandler, Arizona, where we started talking to Chandler when we began operations as far back as 2018, they were very welcoming. They wanted to understand what were the benefits that we were going to be bringing, how could their constituents benefit from this, what were some of the safety standards that we were putting in place. But they were incredibly forward-thinking. They really leaned into this technology, and if you look at how that has evolved, we had a very small service in Chandler, and now our territory in Phoenix is over 350 square miles, including 24/7 operations at Sky Harbor International Airport. So I really love using the Phoenix example as one of something where cities really leaned in early in the beginning. worked closely with Waymo. And listen, there were certainly bumps along the way, right? It wasn't, a completely smooth process, but because we had that relationship early on, we were able to, address things as they popped up. And now, Phoenix is, one of our largest markets, and we've become kind of ubiquitous within the transportation fabric there.
How do you see AVs complementing and not really competing with, but complementing the public transit network, especially in creating, a more reliable first and last mile type of activity?
Yeah, absolutely. I think at Waymo, you will hear us talk a lot about mass transit and how we can increase ridership into existing mass transit systems in cities we operate in, not compete. I do think there is a little bit of a misconception that has been popping up in cities across the country now where they view the deployment of autonomous vehicles like Waymo as something that is going to displace ridership on mass transit. We could not disagree more with that, and we've actually taken proactive steps to try to increase ridership. So if you look at places like San Francisco and Los Angeles right now, we know that nearly 40% of Waymo riders are using the product to get to a mass transit hub. And so we want to actually encourage and incentivize that. So just in the last year, we actually had a program where our riders, if they used a Waymo to go to a transit hub, we gave them a $3 credit in their accounts to use on a future Waymo ride. Just in 2 weeks ago, we announced in LA a new partnership with LA Metro where Waymo will now be part of the Mobility Wallet program. So participants in that program will now be able to have reduced fare or discounted rides in the LA area on Waymo. And so we want to be a solution in increasing ridership in parts of the system where ridership has historically been on the decline. We know that a lot of people want to try to fill that first and last miles. How do they get to Metro? And as Waymo can be a part of that solution, we're excited about that. And I think we're in early conversations with a lot of transit systems across the U.S. right now.
That's great. When we think of kind of national best practices, looking at that, what examples, Laura, from other cities or regions stand out as successful models for integrating AVs, real-time mobility data, and kind of how can regions, states, municipalities start integrating that data into their actual design to better inform and protect vulnerable road users, those types of things as we're going.
Yeah, so I think LA and SCAG in particular has been really forward-looking. I think the cities that tend to innovate, and I'll say cities and regions that tend to innovate, are the ones that have a problem. So Metro Washington has been really innovative in the use of travel demand programs because there was no other option, right? LA, huge safety issues, huge traffic issues. They've been really aggressive in using data to identify not just where vulnerable road users are, which itself is very hard. Like, I'm a data person. I've been running this data analytics company for 15 years. We are still just at the beginning of real pedestrian and bicycle analytics that can really inform. So I think SCAG's a good model to look at. They've really been exploring all sorts of different options, and in planning for the Olympics, and we have many other cities planning for the World Cup, it has really spurred a lot of realization that you got to do something differently, right? So I think those cities are confronting such a crunch that they're getting into it. So I would look to SCAG. I also think that one of the things we see happening, and I don't see it in many states yet, but I do see it in regions, is realizing that you framed coming back from the pandemic and the changes. Mm-hmm. I think people want to feel that we're reaching a new steady point, right? They're like, oh, okay, the change is over. We're having a steady point now. That's not happening. It's going to keep on changing. Whether it's autonomy, whether it's a huge shift in employment in certain regions, including this one, in other regions because of AI, things are going to keep on changing very rapidly. So the cities that are doing best are the cities that are saying, I both have to plan infrastructure for a 30-year horizon and plan for a future that is going to be different than today, and I'm not quite sure how. So what I am working on and am most excited about is where we see people doing planning across multiple scenarios, saying, okay, I'm not just going to predict the future, say economic growth is going to be this, ridership is going to be that, and then run a model, but say, what is an investment that will make sense against 5 very disparate futures? And thinking in that more robustness framework is really where I see the best decisions being made, because we cannot predict what it's going to be like.
Yeah, that integration of planning is critical. And it runs against frameworks that are very tradition based and very difficult to kind of break up, because
Exactly.
Even the public process within, say, state DOTs or others are well known. They're well beaten paths. So the ability to use this data to help inform the planning, to help inform the design, and to welcome the different modes and to do it safely, I think is really one of the critical areas. How should leaders, Matt, how should leaders in DC, Maryland, and Virginia kind of adapt those lessons to this region in a way that works for your company as well?
Yeah, and I mean, I think just to sort of piggyback off the data point, I mean, we're trying to figure out now what are some of the data points that we are out there collecting, right? I mean, our vehicles have a tremendous amount of hardware on them. There's a lot of real-time data collection. Things like potholes, where, real-time pedestrian and cyclist data on the VRU side. Like, we're really in some active discussions right now with cities across the country about what are those categories of data that cities are not getting on a real-time basis that we as private sector, and they're out there on their roads every single day, may be able to help fill that gap. And so I think for us, that's something, and I think there'll be more to come on that subject in the coming months about some exciting new things we're going to be rolling out on that. But I think, here in the region, I think that the DMV region is unique in that this will likely be the first true multi-jurisdictional region in the country to have to address autonomous vehicles. There's nowhere else in the US right now where we have had to really approach that. Like, how is Waymo as a company going to operate across multiple jurisdictions at one time? And so I do think that there is a unique opportunity here for the DMV to really lead in how you implement that regional approach. And so I think we've obviously had some very productive conversations here in the district. We've had some very productive conversations in Maryland. We had some legislation there. I think Virginia is coming up along as well. But I think in order for a system like Waymo to really work, and more importantly, to really be able to serve every single person here in the region and get them to where they need to go, there does need to be that regional approach.
Yeah, that's really exciting to hear about that shared data. The dream really for operating a system from an operations standpoint is full 24/7 situational awareness. You want condition information feeding into your backbone systems. You want reliability information feeding into them as well, so that you can deploy your resources to modify a bad situation or move forward. So, and that's been a real challenge, I think, trying to address that data governance from a standpoint where a private sector is concerned about the non-public information. The public doesn't want that necessarily shared with the government. But there's got to be that kind of subset of data that is really valuable in the public space. It's anonymized. It's in a way that's still going to protect your IP as an organization, but still provides service to the public. It's going to help the public-private partnerships flourish. So that's great to hear. And Laura, where do you see the biggest opportunities for the private sector leadership to support this, to support safer, more efficient, more future-ready regional mobility? This data sharing, curb management, electrification, other areas that you can think of.
Yeah. So I love what you were saying about data availability, and to bring it back to something on the prior panel when we talk about the efficiency of the corridor, right? The efficiency of the infrastructure, because unfortunately we don't have infinity money. So to take it a step back, StreetLight, the company I founded, works to take data that was thrown off by a different system and make it useful for transportation. So we take data that's thrown off by connected cars that have GPS, by smartphones, by all sorts of other things that are moving around, trucks and that sort of thing, turn it into useful analytics. And we have been building that privacy protective case, both for the companies that provide us data and the individuals that are involved, own the devices themselves, for over a decade. And it's tricky, but it is very doable, and the financial savings it has brought are enormous. So when we talk about the advent of data that could come off of vehicles that have cameras and LiDAR and all sorts of other sensors, and instead of building out, literally billions of dollars of sensors along our roadways that then have to be maintained, which itself is really expensive, and instead redeploying that capital to, I don't know, more rail and using the ambient data. That is a huge efficiency when we look at the future financing. And that type of partnership to basically use an investment the private sector is making twice. I call it the data recycling. I think that's very exciting, and I think we're about to kick off sort of a new wave of it with all of the connected vehicles. So that's exciting for me. I also think that as nerdy as it sounds, one of the things that we're all going to have to work for over the next few years is a few reforms in the way we think about data standardization. So again, I've been doing this 15 years. That was the beginning of the whole smart cities tech wave, when that was the buzzword, and that's what everybody wanted to talk about. That's what all the startups were in, and we were all going to have these data lakes that had standardized data, and everybody was going to be able to plug into them. It has not gone super well. And so I've evolved to this I sort of see it as a pair of lungs in my brain, where on the one side, what we see very clearly is agencies need data in the format they need it, and the cost to shift to a standard is just not something we've seen the agencies be able to handle, both the resource cost and the financial cost. At the same time, from the private sector, different data coming out of each city or locality is a non-starter, right? It just means that none of these tools can scale. So instead, you have consulting firms who make a ton of money just building these sort of translation systems. And I should say, StreetLight was acquired 4 years ago by Jacobs Engineering Group, so I'm one of those consulting firms that makes tons of money building these translation systems. I think we're getting to a place in data governance where it's just a lot easier to build those translations. So like every data system will be a pair of lungs. So on this side is the way the city or the agency needs it for itself, and then we just have a series of connectors that translate it. And I think the technology for that is getting really efficient. So I think maybe we've moved to a space where we shouldn't be spending thousands of hours in committees about getting everybody on the same data standard, but instead change it to what's a central data standard we can partner with the private sector on for whatever it is, AV indicators, CAV systems that tell you there's a queue coming up, and then just learning how to translate in, because the attempt to make everyone the same isn't getting off the ground.
Yeah, and I think even when you've got a multi-jurisdictional area
Yes.
like the DMV, it becomes even more complicated because there are it's that public involvement piece that each region is going to continue to be different.
Yeah.
Each municipality is going to continue to be different in terms of how it manages its data governance. So, those translators are really important, and that's kind of a built-in frustration from an agency standpoint. As hard as it is to secure the resources to pull that data in, there's also this concern about the cost of that integration.
Yes.
So, how do each of the municipalities in this region work on governance structures that can enable this rather than hinder it? Because I think it's really a key to operational efficiency for all of us that are in the transportation network business.
Yeah, I think it's to start with the idea that it's going to be a translator and not say you're going to have to change everything in your internal systems. Yeah. And I think that's where we see people start by trying to, again, not universally, but people start by trying to change everything internal. That is a mess. And then they finally get to the translation. So I think starting with a translation, and we haven't said it much, but I think the word AI is going to start coming up more and more, and this is a place where AI is actually quite useful, is that data translation. Right. So again, it's having a central group that manages what do you have to translate to, and doesn't get all up in the business of what are you doing with the data in your own world.
Right. I think we're getting there. I just want to kind of close with one question for both of you. What's one partnership policy shift or mindset change that could most speed up our region's ability to adapt and lead in a future-ready mobility, particularly in improving safety?
So one wonky one, and this touches on some federal stuff, but I think there's room for interpretation, which is a lot of the money that is spent is designed in a way that it's assumed that it will be spent on hours and people billing hourly. And again, I'm saying this as a representative of a consulting firm that does this. We need to make it neutral how the thing is delivered, right? We can't say, oh, we're buying 4,000 hours of your time. We should say we're buying a reduction in response time to crashes of 10%. and you get there somehow. And it doesn't matter if it's a mixture of hours and subscriptions and technology, right? So I think that's the biggest shift, is agencies framing what they want in terms of outcomes and then providing flexibility on how the private sector gets to those outcomes. That's where you're going to drive the innovation.
Right.
I mean, I think what I would love to see in terms of a shift, I think it's more collaborating on how, not if. I mean, the reality is, in the case of autonomous vehicles, the reality is here, right? Waymo, just alone as a company, we're doing 250,000 fully driverless paid rides every single week in the 5 markets I just mentioned. We're going to be expanding to more than a dozen in the next year. Tens of thousands of people are using AVs to go to the grocery store, to doctor's appointments, to the airport. So this idea that this is some far-off futuristic concept, it's not. I mean, you can call somebody who lives in one of those cities and you can ask them about it. So I think really what I'd love to see is more about how do we make this work in a particular city or market or in a region like here in the DMV, not, is this going to happen? Because it is going to happen. And I think there's a lot of opportunity here for cities that haven't had AVs historically to really figure out what are the benefits that they can have, right? I mean, we know right now that Waymo vehicles are involved in 5 times fewer injury-causing crashes than human drivers, right? It's a 91% reduction in serious injury-causing crashes. It's more sustainable. We operate a fully EV fleet. It's more equitable. Our vehicles go to the entirety of a territory we operate in. So I see huge upside here for cities, and I'd love to have a more collaborative partnership with cities on, how do we bring these benefits? Because we want to do that. And so I think that is sort of the shift that we're looking for, and we're seeing it already. And I think here in the DMV region, there's been a lot of discussion over the last, even just 12 to 18 months about what autonomous vehicles are going to look like. And so hopefully we'll continue to see more of that. And I should also just make a plug here. For those of you who haven't seen a Waymo vehicle, we have one right outside on the 8th Street entrance. So I encourage you to go out there. Hopefully it's not too rainy, and you can see the technology yourself firsthand.
Well, that's great. Thank you both for participating in this conversation. I think, when we're, as consumers of transportation, we're all going through this somewhat chaotic change, but it's happening so rapidly, and it's happening right before our eyes, and it's bringing better service. It's going to improve safety, and it's going to integrate with the systems that are the backbone of a region like this, like the transit systems and others. The transportation network is going to benefit, and the region's going to benefit, and its people are. Hopefully get that commute time down into the 20 minutes here in the real near future. But I want to thank Kathy and Jack for this forum and for the ability to participate in it, and have a great day.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks.